Right. And we are live streaming it as well, Sam. Happy Halloween, everyone. Awesome. I see some folks who are joining. Okay. And I know that we are also doing a live stream that's happening right now as well for people to check out. If you can't make this live, we're live streaming it. My name's Tim Sarantonio. We're going to get started in just a moment. We have a healthy amount of registrants for this Halloween special, Ghouls and Guidelines, Navigating Artificial Intelligence Safely with ChatGPT. I'm excited for you to join this Connected Fundraisers community special presentation. And we're going to get started formally in just a moment, but I'm going to go over some basic, kind of ways that this is going to work. So I'm Tim Sarantonio, Director of Corporate Brand at Neon One, also the CF Community Manager. And so if you're joining us because you heard about it in the community, great. That's cool because we have Slack conversations. There's some people sharing their costumes today for some fun. A lot of good stuff happening there. But if you're just joining us for the first time and just kind of learning, really excited to have you here. I'm going to also make sure that we're watching the chat. We're going to do some polls. This is going to be interactive. So let's get that going just to make sure that, I see other people like George here. So why don't you use the chat to type in who you are, where you are in the world, and if you're wearing a costume for Halloween today, maybe you throw that in there too. Let's get that going. Just to make sure that we are going there. Now, Sam Headland is going to be our kind of ghoulish master for today, I suppose, Sam. And so, kind of the AI master for us. So we have some folks, no costume, Donna, all good. I'm wearing a light up candy corn necklace. Love it, Jenny. Alicia from Connecticut. Awesome. I'm in here in upstate New York. We have May, who's dressed up as the Easter Bunny from Christian Connections for International Health. Sam, where are you in the world, actually? You're on the Pacific Coast.
Yes, so I'm currently in California. I've also spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. And my background here, when we're talking about what's real and, is this real? Is this AI? This behind me actually looks like some sort of like painted scene, but this is actually a picture I took at this wonderful pumpkin walk that they do every year, I think, in Louisville, Kentucky. And so this is a scene from real life here, amazingly enough.
It's not all AI, folks, and that's what we're going to learn here. So we got folks from Scottsdale. We got Ann surrounded by middle schoolers. We got Florida, Pooh Bear, and there is a cheer bear. So I am a kind of lucky bear right here on that side. So, okay, enough of that. Thank you, folks, for participating in that way. We're going to make this fun and interactive as well. So, Sam, maybe if you want to go ahead and start to share your screen, I'll explain as you get ready what we're going to be doing today. So this is kind of a more interactive workshop style situation. You're not going to get lectured at the whole time by any means, folks. We're going to launch a poll. Maybe, Sam, maybe this is a good time for the poll, perhaps, in terms of we're going to talk about ChatGPT in a few different ways, kind of some high-level items around artificial intelligence, but we're really going to zero in on ChatGPT in particular because that's the new hotness, right? But there's so many different conversations happening. And what we do is we focus on growing nonprofits. This is not the big nonprofits, right? I came from a small nonprofit. My first organization had an annual revenue for everything, including staff, of $90,000, right? So these are things that can help not just the big nonprofits. If anything, a growing organization that we are typically working with is really going to be able to execute in some really exciting and interesting ways. And we're lucky to have Samuel here, who is not only a wonderful member of our product team, but has really kind of gotten excited to bring this to you because he's doing his own work on artificial intelligence learning, and he'll share his own story. But we're going to start with a poll, but we're going to actually go through a real demo. And depending on timing, maybe even bring some people up and have a discussion. But no matter what, we're going to watch the chat. We want to answer your questions. This is for you in a hands-on way. So Sam, I'm going to be here. I'm not distracting. I will turn off my camera, but I'm going to be here the whole time if you need to tag me and say, okay, can you, say if somebody's asking a question or can you help me out with this thing? That's my role here, folks, is to make sure that you and Sam get connected. And otherwise, Sam, the show is yours.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tim. Great. So this poll that Tim was running, I believe, is about really your let's see. I will
I just launched it for folks.
So, okay.
So
and it tells me that I
is,
can't vote in it. So that avoids that avoids
good.
any crossed wires there.
So we have definitely in terms of the live participation, in the 77% range in terms of folks. And so the question is, what's your skill level of ChatGPT so far? Sam, 63% has never tried it. So this is going to be fun. Great. This is going to be fun.
Yeah,
no advanced, no advanced users.
Yeah. Because, I would say, I consider myself an intermediate user at this point on many of its functions. And the reason that I'm giving this webinar is really because my expertise is more broadly in how do we apply AI in organizations and how do we use it safely. And so what I chose ChatGPT, one, because it's exciting to get hands-on with, and two, because you can get hands-on with it by talking about it today, we can understand some broader things about AI and we can see what it can do for us. So the agenda here today is we're going to talk about, we're going to try to get a little bit past the hype here and talk about how this applies to us in our organizations and say, how do we want tech to help us? What do we want tech to help us with? And then from there, we're going to talk about what's exciting and scary about ChatGPT and what does it show us about this future of technology. From there, we'll talk about those risks and the types of things that are in the news, and then how do we address these things hands-on. And from there, what does it look like when we get into ChatGPT and we try asking it to do things? What can it do? What is it good at? What is it not as good at? And what can we learn from looking at this tool? So, yeah, okay, here we go. Yeah, and so whenever we're looking at any kind of technology, it's really important to look back at the human-centered design of it. What can we do to make it work for us? And there are areas in our organizations like fundraising, communications programs. There's so many different areas that we could use technology in. And when we look at a tool like ChatGPT that's good at working with text in particular, we can say, okay, do you use it for planning? Do you use it for summarizing? Is it a writing or editing tool? Do you want to use it for analyzing? And so when we look at those areas of our organizations, it could be applied in a lot of different ways. One of the things that I learned from, and I think there was a great episode on the Donor Growth podcast that I can share with you later, which was pointing out that people often think about ChatGPT as a writing content tool, when often it's not necessarily the best at writing content from scratch. Sometimes it's the best. Sometimes it's actually better at transforming, analyzing, and summarizing, expanding. Sometimes if you give it something to work with, it can actually do a lot better than just sort of going from the ground up. And of course, when you think about what you're going to do with anything new in your organization, you want to be asking, what will you actually get out of it? And so some of the things that AI in general could do for us are things like speeding things up, making things less rote and more creative, and giving us time to be less transactional and more relational, that type of thing. So we're going to look at that, and I'd be curious to hear from all of you as well of what are the pain points in your organizations, and what are you excited about using technology to make easier or better for you and your clients. Now, this book, The Smart Nonprofit by Beth Kanter and Alison Fine, this is one of the best guides I've seen to how we can think about AI in the nonprofit world specifically. And they provide some really good frameworks on how do you walk through the types of decisions I've been talking about. And one of the things they point out, of course, is the hammer nail type of problem, where if you start with the technology itself and you just say, okay, I just want to apply this like a generic hammer, you sometimes end up treating everything like a nail, or you don't necessarily find the right solution for it. Another metaphor that they mention, and that they quote some thinkers in this book, is that of hot sauce, that if you apply a little bit, it can be great for your organization. If you apply too much indiscriminately, it can just be overkill. I would disagree a little bit with that assessment, though, just because different types of more advanced tech, that they call smart tech, various ways of applying AI and other kinds of automation, are going to be great for our organizations, but it's going to happen in so many different complementary ways that the question is less how much you apply than whether you're taking the right flavor and applying it in the right places. So it's more like putting together a complete recipe that combines technology and humans and your processes, that type of thing. Now, we've probably all seen a lot of these headlines about ChatGPT, but I think it bears looking at what is actually going on there. And just to remind us about what's been in the news lately, that the newest version of ChatGPT that uses GPT-4, it's had a big increase in its ability to pass the bar exam. It's been great at doing some medical diagnosis. It's already being used by some fundraisers in some interesting ways. And another tool made by OpenAI has gotten a lot of press as well. Dolly is now in version 3, is one of the image generation programs, and it's now built into the GPT plus version of ChatGPT. Now, what's scary though, and we're doing this Halloween theme that Tim was very creative about with this, and when we're talking about what can go wrong, ChatGPT may be able to pass the bar exam and do better than 90% of the humans taking it, but it also can end up hallucinating made up law cases, and if you don't check it, it led to these lawyers paying $5,000 in fines. This was one of the most funny and interesting cases to me. One of the first people who has threatened to sue OpenAI as ChatGPT rolled out was this mayor in Australia who also had, it was also a case of hallucination, but in his case, ChatGPT claimed that this bribery case, that he was actually the heroic whistleblower who exposed this corruption and got this bribery out of Australian government. He actually ended up being referred to by ChatGPT as the person who had done the bribery, as opposed to the one who had been the whistleblower exposing it. So there's this weird sort of overlap with reality that's not quite there with reality. So that's scary to me. And then, of course, Samsung and other organizations banned the earlier versions of ChatGPT. A lot of the content from it was leaking into their future versions of their product. And then as ChatGPT 4 came out as well, they did some really intensive safety testing on it, and some of the findings there were concerning. And we can talk about that more as well. I actually used this version of the article because I think when I read this report myself, I got similar to this blogger's take on it, which is it doesn't necessarily match what happened, doesn't necessarily match the headlines, or we don't necessarily know if it's if it fit a simple description like in the headlines. And then, of course, the other thing that we should be aware of is the intellectual property issues that are happening with a lot of AI. And so, many authors have sued OpenAI for how their works were used in training it. And of course, that's an even more big topic when it comes to visual types of generation AIs, including DALL-E. So when it comes to this, I think all of you, a majority of you are coming from not having necessarily tried this hands-on. And so when we look at this today, we can think through this and what you think it's capable of doing, what it's good at and bad at. But when it comes to something like ChatGPT, I've heard people underestimate it and saying it's just basically a Google search. It doesn't give you that much new or different that you wouldn't get by Googling a topic. And then I've heard people try to do math in it, and it's actually not that good at math. The current versions of it even the most advanced versions of it do make math mistakes sometimes. People treat it like a calculator because we're used to dealing with computers that are set up as calculators, but it's not really it's really a language tool more than a math tool. And then, of course, we've seen the headlines that talk about how smart it is at some level, that it knows some things. It's not right about everything that it knows, but it seems to know a lot of things. And the image of dice here is really reflecting the fact that we need to change how we see these tools, at least until they get more advanced. That this isn't like a traditional computer where you ask it to add 1 + 1 and it has an adding circuit inside the computer and it adds up to 2. It's really more of a probability device that is predicting what a human would write given these instructions. And so it's a simulation of human intelligence, and it's a simulation in particular of human language as it exists on the internet and in books. It doesn't reflect quite as much the way that a computer would traditionally solve a problem, and it doesn't reflect the way a human actually thinks about solving these problems necessarily. So let's go through and talk about some of these risks that have come up, and let's talk about what we can do to minimize them and how we see them at this point. Hallucination, as we talked about, I think that it's going to reduce over time, or it's going to be less obvious over time as ChatGPT gets better. But it's really important, and I think it's valuable that it's out here in what's in some ways an embarrassingly bad version initially. And ChatGPT 3.5 that came out initially, they put it out there faster than they planned to, and part of what OpenAI has done over time has always been to put things out and see how the public reacts, and to see the risks of AI in interaction with the real world, so that we see how people really interact with it. So my fear with hallucination is it's going to get harder to spot, and people's trust in GPT will go up, while the chances to spot where it's not correct will go down. So let's talk about what we can do about that, though. So first of all, one way of thinking about hallucination is it's almost like over-interpreting and overly trying to find connections between things. And so the way that it happens in language is similar to this rather horrifying image from, I think this is from a let's see, it was this Google project that basically shows how some image AIs process information. So what's going on in this image AI is that it is looking for and trying to interpret patterns and see, is that a dog? Is there a dog? Is there a dog there? And it finds some connections of where the dog actually is, but then it also imagines maybe there's another dog here, and it's like, no, that's not a dog. Sorry, that's just kind of horrifying. And that's similar to, I've heard some experts on this say that hallucination, in some ways, it's a feature, not a bug, in that we need tools like ChatGPT to be creative and to look for connections. Just like if you had a student writing an essay, you would get mad at them if they didn't go, you'd be concerned if they didn't go looking for connections. The question is, do they have the evidence to back that up? And ChatGPT is better at finding the connections than necessarily knowing whether it has that evidence at this point. Okay, but what can we do about hallucination? And we'll show you more examples about this later, but one thing you can do is know ChatGPT's weaknesses. And GPT itself has been working on this, where they have more guardrails now than they did even a few months ago, where if you ask for something that it's not likely to have a good answer for, it will tell you, I can't help you with that, or I'm not as knowledgeable about that. But you need to know that it has its limitations and what it can know. And then a lot of what you have to do is give it consistent instructions so that it will be able to, it knows what you're asking it to do, and so that you know what you're expecting from it, for that matter. And this is one of the challenging ones, is that it's good to only have it do work that you know how to fact check yourself. The issue with that, of course, is that one of the things that people are excited about with this tool is that we have, for example, web designers who are not very advanced with web pages saying, I can crank out a rough draft of a website very fast, faster than my own skills allow me. But the problem is, if you don't hire somebody who knows how to check security on websites, or at least follow the instructions on security that ChatGPT will give you itself, you're going to end up with a less secure website, for example. So there's that. And it really comes down to writing specific prompts, in other words, and knowing what you're trying to get out of it. This bullet point about know how much precision and consistency you need here. Actually, I should highlight that. So when it comes to when you're choosing to use any tool, whether it's ChatGPT or a more traditional kind of customized machine learning tool, you might need some exact numbers for one purpose. You might need only a rough guess in other purposes, and you're going to be safest if you use ChatGPT for things that match its being right most of the time, but not necessarily being right about everything 100% of the time. Okay, so the next thing that's been coming along, as we talked about with the Samsung headline, is that this is largely this is largely set up and handled for large organizations that have been proactive about using the solutions that ChatGPT has set up. The question is, the problem, I think, is for a lot of organizations like ours, is to make sure that your organization is taking advantage of that. So the risk here is anything you type into ChatGPT in the free or even plus versions, there's a risk that it's going to be used as training data for future versions of ChatGPT, and there's also a risk that that's what they promise in the terms of service, that's their default, and it can also. There are also, if you're using, at least in the past, there were just potential security issues, just like any website, where, of course, what you type into any website isn't necessarily secure unless there's a good encryption in place. Where OpenAI has landed with this, though, is that at the last version I checked, the two options you have are either use the OpenAI, use ChatGPT Enterprise, which has very good encryption, and it's set up to use these to not have your data used by them in any fashion at all, or the last I checked, there's also the option for ChatGPT to simply turn off data sharing. The current version of this is, if you don't save your data within ChatGPT, then they're not allowed to use it. But that's pretty inconvenient, because then then you don't have a good record of what your chats were, and you have to copy and paste or something. So those are the two options. And of course, this really depends on what you're dealing with, what the security issues are with either, your own organization's intellectual property, the confidentiality of client data, all those types of things. But it is something that they're working on. Let me get back into this. And again, we can talk more about that, but this is an area where if anybody watches this in another few weeks or another month, certainly get the latest information of what they're offering, because they had sort of a messy transition in the middle where they had different options for opting out that aren't necessarily available now. Okay, and then when it comes to intellectual property issues, I take very seriously what these authors have complained about to them, and the way that this is evolving. I think there's going to be a lot of laws and lawsuits resolving this in the next few months and years. The risk to somebody using ChatGPT is generally pretty low from what I've seen. I don't think that it, one, I don't expect the organization to be shut down or make their model much different or worse as a result of them resolving any of these issues. But I do think that the landscape is going to change. I saw in an interview with the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, and he was talking about how really their ideal down the road isn't being a content person so much as they could be a gateway to paying other people for their content. So just like sort of our current sort of Google era of content has some big issues in terms of how do we pay authors better. I think it's an evolving thing that I think really we need to address better. But again, in this early era, there's not a lot of regulation, and it's complex. The other big issue, of course, with intellectual property is when you make something with ChatGPT, do you own it? So I've seen what a number of experts have said on these things. I will tell you, I am not a lawyer, and these things are evolving as we speak. But what the ChatGPT terms of service say is that they don't have any claim on anything you create with ChatGPT, and but you do have, whether you yourself can copyright it depends on a number of things. One is it unique? Very short responses from ChatGPT are not usually that unique, and there's not much to copyright there. And of course, it can't infringe anybody else's intellectual property. So you can't use ChatGPT to make something that would be not copyrightable under other circumstances. So, that's all. That's all a factor.
So Sam,
go ahead.
I want to keep an eye on the time, and I know we
Yeah,
have some nice slides that might give a little bit more structure for people on prompt writing and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to that. Yeah.
Well, maybe if let's even get out of the deck and start to kind of see this, because we promised about 45 minutes of content. I think 15 minutes of interaction would be really cool.
Great. Yeah, let's do that.
And then there's and as you're getting that queued up, maybe you can kind of because we're gonna folks, we're gonna supply the deck in a follow-up. So these writing prompts and things like that, we're gonna kind of see this live. And so some of the other items like the fundraising AI initiative and things like that, we're going to follow up. I'll do a nice little email that helps summarize this. But okay, so that's nice and good. Let's see people are comfortable with it. They understand. Don't put donor data in this thing, okay? Don't put people's names actually in this thing. What can they do with it? Like, let's walk through how this actually works for somebody, because 63% of people have never even tried it. So what does it even look like?
Yeah, great. So yes, and this is a slide that you may want to refer back to.
Yep.
I this particular framework is one that I got from a teacher that I put in the
In the
I put in the notes
appendix,
at the end.
we got the
And but the idea
8-minute
here is
video for
just
people. Yeah,
yeah, and this will be but this is one way of thinking about what is a prompt, because when it comes to GPT, at some level you are, and let me, yeah, I'll just make sure I have this window ready to go for you by the time I open it up here. So when it comes to the what GPT can do, I'm going to open up a window to show you.
sure. Yeah.
And I'll switch the screen sharing over. So it's basically something that you can talk to like you would a human. I've used sort of the,
And we're still seeing the slide deck right now.
yes, yes, I'm getting that flipped
Cool.
over here. And again, I'm not actually a fan of Microsoft Edge, but this just happened to be
You put it in
the
Edge, all
window.
right.
I put this in here. No endorsement intended.
So somebody, this is actually what ChatGPT looks like, folks. This is like
Yes.
it.
Yes. And so what you have here, and you can, the free version of it is located at the same address, chat.openai.com. It will give you a sidebar where you can save chats here, and you can create new chats by clicking here. And then you can close the sidebar if it's you don't want to deal with
And
that.
this is an important point, because some people have asked me, they're like, so wait, I'm supposed to start paying $20 or $50 automatically. Make sure you're going to chat.openai.com, not some
Yes.
other website that is trying to sell you something out of the gate. You can test this without paying.
Exactly. And I can answer any questions you have about what these two offer. I'll tell you that most of what I've learned about this platform, I learned on the free version, and that it can
that,
do a lot.
May, we're answering your question right now, which is the differences between free and paid. So yeah,
Yes.
keep going.
And, yes, and so I will show you, I'll show you what's there. And so, and I see this, here we go. I want to make sure I can see the top of my screen to show you. So within the paid version, you have version 3.5 here, which is, this is the free version. And this is very easy to use, and it will do all of the standard things. Within the paid version, it adds this GPT-4. So the language model is, it's just a little bit more powerful in terms of what it can do. And then it offers a couple of other things within that. So the default, it's basically like using the free version, just slightly better. And then it also has a couple of other settings where you can get it to browse the web and collect some information within the limits of what an automated browser can do, and what websites will let
Still
it do.
pretty limited, I will say.
Yeah, pretty limited. And I haven't tried the new sort of free Bing service that is built on this, but it does some similar things.
It was okay.
And then there's and then it also has a built-in image generator, this Dolly here. And so if you're using any of these three together, you just generally would start a different window for the function that you need the most out of the three of those. The cool thing about the one other thing that in this default mode that it does is it will do image recognition, and you can attach images for a variety of purposes, and it will work with that. But otherwise, this works using this window, and the majority of it you can get started with and understand a lot of it with the free version. And in fact, just for the sake of simplicity, let me just use this free version window to say none of this is hard to do. So in my example here, I had said that it's important to, in particular, to say what you want it to do and to add some other details that are helpful. So let's suppose that I wanted to, as the example there on the slides, is to write a content schedule for 1 month of science education blog posts, and let's see, I'll say a content schedule in table format.
Yep.
For 1 month of science education blog posts written for a 6th grade audience. Also include a column for Instagram and
LinkedIn,
Instagram and Twitter.
or X, whatever they're calling it.
Time, yeah, timing. Twitter content timing. Let's just see what it gives us for this, for example.
So, folks, look at how fast this happened.
Yes, and I think one version of this I have done. Yeah, so it works very quickly, and often it's the going back and editing, just like if you're, just like if you're working in any kind of, human writing situation, going back and editing is often where you get the quality. So if I say here, for example, rewrite to have one theme per week, focused on marine biology, let's say. And so, yes, this conference I was at recently, somebody was saying that she really likes using this more than for generating the final content. She likes ChatGPT for coming up with ideas for the content schedules. And so we have some things here. Now, now what I can do here is I can use this, and this is there's different ways of building on prompts. You might call this is basically prompt chaining here, is one of the terms for this. Here, what we have is this is basically a high level outline of some things that you could do, that you might hand to a human writer and say, here, go run with this. Mm-hmm. But what you can do here then is to say, is to build on that and say, how do you flesh that out? And so I might say, write the blog post and social media posts in a fun, informal style for week 1 only.
And Datisa, to answer your question, OpenAI is the company that makes ChatGPT.
Yes. And to your question about what to sign up for, okay, let me see, did it?
You just got to scroll.
Yeah. And okay, yeah. So here, again, we're trying to write science education for a 6th grade audience. And
do you think that's why it added the emojis?
Yes, and so that's why there's quite this many emojis, but you don't necessarily want it or need it to write like it's texting a 6th grader, but this is one way, one format. And then here is a proposed Twitter post that this was likely trained before, well, this version only remembers through 2021 or so. So if you asked it, does Elon Musk own Twitter? It would not know that.
And yeah, it's not a search engine. It's not, it's a language model, folks. So that's the focus in. This is not all AI. This is a specific application. Sam, some of the things that people have used it, because I want to keep an eye on the time. Maybe, folks, yes. Do you have an application that you've been interested in maybe, wondering about, or like guardrails or things like that? Let's maybe use some time for some open Q&A per se, while you still mess around. I think this is cool to let people see it, but if you do have a question, this is a great time to make sure that we answer it.
Great, yeah, and I'm taking a moment to look back at your comments as well, so that should help.
Yep. Well, some folks were asking about can we use this for neon reports, and I think that like while we're not going to get into that today, the application is possible because it's a language model where you can use it to write queries, you can use it to write code. People are using it to write Python code. Um, oh, she's May's been using it for translation purposes. That's interesting.
Yes, and I've tested the translation quite a bit, and it's quite good at this. So um,
Ooh, I haven't seen this. This is going to be
yeah,
new to
so it's
me.
good at this. It seems to be I've tried it. I don't speak Mandarin, but the posts for most major languages
Huh.
are quite good. It seems to be quite good at major languages. What happens? It doesn't have a lot of guardrails in place for if you're using less common languages or less
Like
common on the
Esperanto, it's
internet
not going to go
languages.
Esperanto.
Um, and what it will do is it will basically say something that isn't as relevant, or it will say some nonsense. Um, so beyond a certain, and again, I'm talking about very obscure languages. So I asked it to use to write in a few
Like the
yeah, I
Romance
asked it. So,
languages.
example, I asked it to write in Guarani, that is a South American indigenous language, and it actually speaks some Guarani, but it doesn't make any sense, or it wasn't really responding to the prompt. It can't really make much sense in languages that it's not good at. But most major languages, it's quite good at, which is pretty impressive, just because such a general purpose tool. It knows many things, including how to speak other
So,
languages.
Sam, what's some good guardrails and when the human needs to get inserted here?
Yes. So one, let's see. So one way of thinking about it is, if you would, that you want to have everything that you work on with it, you want to have it checked by a human. And beyond that, as you're working within your organization, you want to have some standards in your organization to say, for example, depending on the version of ChatGPT you're using, for example, might want to tell people, don't put client data in this if it's
Yeah.
unless you're using an enterprise version that is highly encrypted and you are following all of your legal and compliance
Any
responsibilities.
PII, do not
Yeah.
put PII
Yeah,
data
yeah.
into this thing whatsoever.
Yeah. So there's some very specific so there's that. So when it comes to guardrails, is that have a process where, if you let's just say that you have an intern who's really smart, and you would trust them to come up with some good ideas for you, but you definitely want to trust their work, and you also know that they haven't had as much of a background check as your most trusted staff, and therefore you don't want to share a lot of internal data with them. You use it in that way, much like you would someone who's a staff member who needs some oversight.
Sam, we're hitting our time. And
Yes.
this obviously is the beginning of more of this type of conversation. We have some really interesting things when it comes to AI in the Neon One universe and intelligence. We talked a little bit about this at Generosity Exchange. What final kind of comments do you have for folks as they approach this?
Yes. So I'm going to see what ChatGPT says about how to learn more about it. I think that one of the main things to understand here is that, and this is, I didn't talk a lot about in the safety conversation earlier, is this is in some ways a simulation of, or it makes you feel very connected to something that talks like a human. That doesn't mean, however, that it has all of the know-how that a human does. And it doesn't have some of the same consequences in some ways. If it's completely wrong, it will say, it will say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I that I was wrong about that, but it's not going to get it's pay docked for completely making something up or being off. So understand that the risk of overuse with a technology like this is that you humanize it too much, or you anthropomorphize it too much. But on the other hand, play with it and learn what it can do. So I think I've raised all kinds of legal, ethical, and other things that we should be aware of when using a tool like this, especially in this early time as these things are getting sorted out. But even if you decide you don't love it, tinkering with this and playing with it will give you a sense of what other people in your organization probably are doing, and that you may need to set up some policies in your organization about to make it a more useful tool. I think the other thing I would say is that look at and come back to what is the business problem, the human problem that you're trying to solve in your organization, and how can technology support that? And by comparing very carefully between what you need and what any technology tool can do like this, you'll get a clearer picture of, is it a good tool for you?
Some of the fun applicable things as you head into end of the year could be testing different subject lines in your email and asking it to give you a few different options for tone. For example, in our email report that we put out earlier this year, we used OpenAI's DaVinci model to analyze subject lines from over 32,000 Neon CRM users. And we found that the most engaging types of emotions were things like relief, gratitude. They were not negative things. These were positive emotions. So building connection and trust with your audience, which the Connected Fundraisers community is all about, can be augmented by things like this. So take a quick look. We'll end with one very concrete example. So this is like on the fly. Sam came up with this, right? Like, look at this, right? Like, taco about feeding hungry kids. Like, and sometimes when we've done this, they're like really, really bad. That's the thing. That's why you need a human here. But sometimes they can lead to some magical stuff. Folks, we're at our time. I want to thank all of you for participating. We're going to follow up tomorrow with some other resources on this. I also did drop our next community conversation with Professor Sitai Nugent. We're going to be talking about trust, transparency, and data, and kind of these very large questions. How do they apply to your work? Samuel, any final parting words other than the fact that our deep gratitude for joining us today?
Yes, I would say I definitely want to hear how this journey is for you. I think that this is such an exciting new direction that technology is going, and it's really up to us to go and apply it in some good ways. And keep an eye on and look to people like Tim, who have been working on these standards for how we use AI in our organizations. And I would like to support all of you in your journey.
Very cool. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Not scary, but fun to try.